Hi everyone. So today we're taking a look at the Samsung Galaxy S6. This is the latest and greatest smartphone from Samsung, coming onto the market with a bang. If this is your first time checking out a review from the Androidizen, welcome, and do please subscribe. Our videos do tend to be very comprehensive and they tend to last for around 30 minutes or so you might want to throw this video into your watch later list or into a playlist so you can come back and watch the whole thing at your leisure. Now we are taking a look at the Samsung Galaxy S6 here, not the Edge. I will have a separate video uploaded in a few days explaining the reasons why, but it mostly comes down to the fact that the S6 is the one that the majority of users are going to be picking up this year. The Edge, at the end of the day, is an edge case device. Very few users are going to go for that device because it doesn't really offer anything particularly special. In actual fact, it generally weakens the S6 offering in my opinion. But let's start looking at the Galaxy S6. Let's dive into these specs first of all. The Samsung Galaxy S6 is certainly the most feature-packed device on the hardware front that we've had in quite a while. They've moved to a Quad HD display, running at 2560 by 1440. Now that gives a pixel per inch density of around 577 ppi. Now one thing I want to mention with this 5.1 display is this is Quad HD. It is not 4K. Now you might think to yourself, what does that actually matter? Well, it's a bit of a marketing gimmick the Samsung and other manufacturers have gone for here. Essentially what they've done is taken a 720p as a resolution, called that HD, and then said, well, this is a Quad HD display, effectively 4 times the resolution of 720p. Well, that's fine, but when was the last time you saw a 720p display on a high-end smartphone? So realistically, this is a double HD display. It's twice the resolution of 1080p, and as such, it does provide exceptional graphics quality. Colours here are bright and vibrant, and they really pop, and you cannot see the pixels even if you tried. But this is a marketing thing at the end of the day. It's a higher resolution display, but it certainly isn't Quad HD. That's just a marketing term that in many respects is misleading people into thinking that they've got a 4K display in their smartphones. I've heard a number of shop assistants mention exactly that, so clearly there is some confusion being caused by this particular little marketing spin. CPU and GPU duties this time round are going to Samsung's in-house chip, the Exynos 7 Octa 7420 processor. Now essentially what this is a 2.1 GHz processor with 8 cores in a big little configuration, backed up with 3 GB of RAM. The idea here is very simple. Using the CPU's big little configuration and 8 cores, the phone will intelligently kick in cores that are needed for high power, but the rest of the time will fall back onto lower power cores, extending the battery life. Now what this does mean is that essentially you have oodles and oodles of power in this device, but you only need to use it when you actually need to use it, instead of the device effectively running ungoverned most of the time and simply working as fast as possible using all of the heavy processing cores. Essentially here you can fall back onto something that's very low powered, that's perfect effectively for email, basic web browsing, etc. When you come to play a game, watch a movie, then those big cores will be kicked in and obviously your power drain will go up as well. But using this big little configuration does mean that Samsung at very least should be able to maintain a reasonable level of battery performance relative to the speed of the device, even though the battery in the device is actually smaller than previous Samsung Galaxy devices. As you can see from the benchmarks, the Exynos chip that Samsung have gone for here absolutely smokes the competition, making the Qualcomm Snapdragon 810 look positively underpowered, especially when we consider the thermal properties and the actual clock speeds that Qualcomm are achieving here relative to what Samsung have done. This chip really is a bit of a marvel. If you want to see some real-world performance from this device, do check later in this review where we'll actually be showing you some gameplay. This will give you a much better idea as to how powerful this device actually is. Camera duties this time round is being served by Sony with a 16 megapixel shooter with an aperture of f1.9. Now the focal length there is 28mm. Interestingly, we now have optical image stabilization back. You might remember the heavy criticism I gave last year to any high-end smartphone which launched without optical image stabilization. It destroys low light performance, it leads to blurry images, and an unsatisfactory camera in every scenario. So here, with optical image stabilization now included, what do we get? Well, we get pretty much the best shooter in any smartphone released this year so far. The low light performance is exceptional, and it easily beats the iPhone 6 and the latest HTC One M9 in any test you care to throw at it. There are some issues with the white balance. It feels like it hews a little bit towards the yellow side in low light, where if compared to, say, an iPhone 6, the iPhone 6 is hewing a little bit less to the yellow and has a slight more blue tint or purple tint to it in some cases. At the end of the day, that is personal preference for you. If you prefer the whiter balance from the iPhone, then of course you're not going to particularly like what Samsung has done here. But ultimately, when we're dealing with things like color balance, you can fix that in post-production in about 3 seconds anyway. It's not a major issue. What Samsung have delivered here is the best smartphone camera in any device released to the market so far. Video performance is up to 4K, and that's actual 4K, not Quad HD. What this means in real terms is your camera can shoot higher resolution videos than the display on the smartphone can actually show you, but even so. 4K at 30 frames a second, 60 frames a second 1080p, and so on is excellent, and the image quality is sublime in my opinion. I've come away very impressed with the camera and video options that the Samsung Galaxy S6 is offering. The camera app itself has been vastly improved over previous iterations, now making a damn sight more sense with how things are laid out. Features are easier to get hold of and to actually understand. A vast improvement. And I just can't get over how good this low light performance actually is here. It's something that personally I find very, very important in any kind of camera, be that a smartphone or a traditional point and shoot or even a DSLR. It does make a massive difference to the quality of the average overall shots you're going to be able to get from a device. Now, battery life. This is always going to be fairly subjective, and it's always going to be quite a difficult thing to test for. What can I tell you about the Samsung Galaxy S6's battery? Well, it is smaller than the previous generation of devices, coming in at a 2550 mAh battery. Previous one was I think about 2800. So there has been a drop, but this device is using the big. LITTLE technology. Now that does mean it's able to eke out more power out of the battery because it's not having to run all of the cores aggressively all of the time. It will fall back onto lower power cores. Now, battery life is always subjective, but in my tests I've found I can easily get around a full day out of the battery with a combination of browsing, email, few games, some multimedia, and so on. Now, if you put this device through a heavy load for a long period of time, then of course expect this battery to fall away rapidly. If you spend 3 hours gaming, you're going to find your battery is dead. But that's the same on the vast majority of smartphones today, and even high-end tablets. At the end of the day, the more power we have at the top end, the higher those gigahertz, the more power we are going to be draining off at full peak performance. That has to be accepted, but ultimately what we're really interested in is, well, what is the average like? How does it work in the real world? Well, for me, I found I could get through a full day, around to about 7 or 8 p.m. in the evening, taking the phone off charge at 8 a.m. For me, that's acceptable. But I can certainly see times when I'm probably going to be reaching for either that external wireless charging unit or even just an external portable battery to throw some extra charge on. This is going to be especially true if you're taking a lot of photographs or using the screen a lot, running the flash, or obviously using that video camera, which makes sure that screen stays on. Those are going to be big battery drains, and I can certainly see myself reaching for that external battery pack if I'm out for a long period of time taking a lot of photographs and video. One of the biggest puzzlers for the Samsung Galaxy S6 hardware is the inclusion of USB 2, not USB 3 as has been now standard for a good few years. The slower data transfer speeds of USB 2 are frustrating, to the point of annoyance frankly. Considering we are now dealing with 4K videos, higher resolution images and so on, it is baffling that Samsung would have stuck a very old USB controller, let's face it, USB 2 is not exactly modern, into their flagship smartphone. It's difficult to comprehend why they've done this until you realise they also appear to have taken MHL away. MHL is a way of connecting your smartphone to a display, or like a television or a monitor, something that a lot of business users find very useful. When it comes to all of those little extra bits, it's all here. Things like GPS, your Wi-Fi, 802.11a, b, c, n, AC, it's all here basically. So you've got the full range of wireless connectivity, Bluetooth, GPS, accelerometers, gyroscopes, the lot. And they all work very well, it has to be said. The fingerprint sensor makes an appearance on the Samsung Galaxy S6, but it has been updated so that it works a lot more closely to the iPhone 6 way of doing things. No more swiping, just put your finger on it. It works, but as I have pointed out numerous times over the last 20 years, biometrics are junk. It has been proven time and time again, including by the Chaos Computer Club, that fingerprints are not an adequate form of security and protection. Do not rely on them. Please do not rely on them. Passwords are much more secure than a fingerprint, no matter what these companies will tell you in trying to sell you, frankly, a gimmick. Because that's what it is. It's a gimmick. No company can guarantee fingerprint biometrics because fingerprint biometrics are fatally flawed. So, hands-on with the Samsung Galaxy S6. Now, the most striking thing straight away is the look of this device. This has got to be the most beautiful device Samsung has ever made. It's right up there with the kind of stuff that Johnny Ive does at Apple. It's just gorgeous. Sleek, beautiful lines with lovely rounded corners. Everything just looks fantastic. At certain angles, though, you do get the feeling that Samsung might have copied Apple here, especially within the bottom grille. It does look a little iPhone-esque. One of the most outstanding things I think Samsung has done here is not what you can actually physically see from the device when you hold it, but actually when you use it, is how fast it is. Now that actually comes not just from the Exynos chip that Samsung has built here, but also much more importantly from some decisions they've made actually within the package itself. For instance, they've moved to DDR4, LPDDR4 to be exact. Now this is a low profile memory. Now essentially you may be used to DDR3 in things like your desktop computer, laptop and older smartphones. Here we've moved to the latest and greatest DDR4. But also what Samsung have done is to include a new memory controller as well. This is the controller that handles how data is written to the smartphone and read from the smartphone while you're using it. In many other devices, as I've highlighted countless times, we find that whilst you're installing data, say from the App Store, directly onto the device becomes incredibly sluggish with Android. No longer with the Galaxy S6. The thing is absolutely blazing fast, even when you've got heavy data processes hitting that internal storage. It's an absolute triumph, and just on its own, it makes this device feel so much more responsive when you have it under heavy load. Samsung's only downside, I think, with the physicality of the Samsung Galaxy S6 is the protruding camera. It doesn't look particularly awesome, and at certain angles, the way the shadows catch it make it look like it's almost kind of pushed through the back of the housing and not quite as flush as I might like. It unfortunately does mar the back of the camera in my opinion, but I know some people don't have a problem with it at all. The flash does hew towards the blue side, which is fairly normal on these kind of LEDs. But again, it would have been nice to have a little bit of software compensation there for the quite stark blue look that you get from using the flash on the Samsung Galaxy S6. By and large, the in-the-hand feel is quite exceptional. This really is a comfortable device to hold. You can reach your corners quite easily whilst you're using it, as well as being able to come down and hit that home button. One of the only downsides on my particular unit, and I don't know whether this extends to every Samsung Galaxy S6, I think it's quite likely. If you run your finger around the edge just here, essentially between this metal band and the screen's white here, you can feel a rough edge all the way along. Now it's not a sharp rough edge, but it is a rough edge, and it's not the nicest thing I've ever felt. I think HTC on the M9 have done a better job really at making sure all of those edges are nicely rounded with no kind of roughness. Here it does feel like Samsung has not quite finished these off as well as it. Now the Galaxy S6 in the hand feels very well balanced. At no point does it feel like it's trying to tip in any direction, but when I've tried to do a balance test with this device, as we do here, a very unscientific, can it be balanced on the edge of your finger, I've found it quite difficult to find the center point on this device. I think the camera module is just a little bit top heavy, but only just. It is very difficult to find the perfect balance, and you can feel it wobbling the whole time in comparison to many other devices where finding that center balance point is very, very quick and easy and it stays put. The S6 does have a slight rockiness there in the center. Okay, onto the software package that Samsung have delivered here. By and large, everything is absolutely fantastic. The range of applications they've gone for here is much more limited. They've kind of kept it to just the stuff that Google doesn't kind of provide, or where they can augment that a little bit to add more features. Now, they have done their usual trick of including a messaging app, a phone app, a contacts app, internet, and so on, which are effectively separate apps from the Google suite of tools like Chrome, Gmail, and so on. So again, that's down to you and your personal preference as to which of these particular applications you'll be using day in, day out. Now, Samsung have made a few interesting choices here. For starters, we have Microsoft's apps installed, although I believe when they announced this they were going to also be including Microsoft Office, which would be Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. That didn't come with my out-of-the-box installation, as it were. All I got was OneDrive, OneNote, and Skype. Interestingly, OneDrive, Microsoft are giving you 100 gig of storage on OneDrive if you buy the Samsung Galaxy S6. All you need to do is log into the OneDrive app. Now really, Samsung should be applauded for having not crammed this device with loads and loads of rubbish. They have kept it to just what is actually needed and cut down the bloat. Now, for instance, the apps that I thought to myself, ugh, why have Samsung included those, have actually been improved considerably and are now quite good. S-Health, for instance, actually works really nicely with the fingerprint sensor, which is essentially on the back of the device here, the LED. From the flash is also used to measure things like heart rate. S-Planner, the calculator, and clock are all iterations really of Samsung's previous apps, and they do effectively duel with the Google apps that are already on there. Pick which one you want to use would be my advice. S-Voice is no longer a complete pain, mostly because it hasn't been enabled by default in a way that means that it's in your kind of click patterns with your home button there. Now it's something that is activated by saying a phrase you yourself can set up when you first start up the device. All of this makes for a Galaxy S6 that doesn't seem to want to take over your life, but wants to fit into it instead. It doesn't want to get in your way and be annoying. It wants to be a companion to your daily life. And the software really does reflect that, I believe. The camera has been vastly improved, massively in fact. It's now considerably easier to find your way to all of the different settings and modes. For instance, in camera mode, all we have to do is press the mode button and we can switch to Pro to have full control over ISO settings, white balance, you name it. Selective focus, allowing us to tweak the depth of field within the focus. Panorama, that works very quickly in comparison to most panorama apps. Slow motion and fast motion for dealing with those very specific use cases of when you're trying to take pictures. Virtual shot, which in my opinion was a little bit tacky really. What it does is it puts a virtual icon on the screen that allows you to keep an object within that position. You then move yourself around that object, creating a kind of internal panorama around the object, I suppose you could say. But interestingly, they've also added a download store here, so you can download new effects and shots. A really clever idea, and hopefully that will be something that will be opened up to developers. Likewise, we have quick access to various settings here. Now, these various settings are for the picture size, the video size, whether you've got tracking autofocus, so whether it'll try and hold the focal position of an object moving through a scene, for instance a person or an animal. Video stabilization is actually only available at lower resolutions, at 1080p 30 and below. Grid lines, again, this is something that's very much for those photographers out there, allowing you to see your proportions. You can set your locations, whether you review pictures directly after they're taken, and whether quick launch is turned on, which is double tapping this home key to bring up the camera, which starts extraordinarily quickly. Voice control is also an option, and you can also set how those volume keys are going to function as well. Overall, this camera is surprisingly fast, and I do mean surprisingly fast. The speed that it locks on with autofocus is probably up there with the fastest devices I've seen. In fact, when we did some timings with this, we were finding it was able to lock on as quickly as a DSLR camera. That's pretty remarkable stuff. It does occasionally find itself hunting for focus in lower light situations, but nowhere near as bad as many of the other smartphones released last year. The Samsung Galaxy S6 has nailed optics really well and truly. Now, one of the areas that has seen the biggest change in my opinion is the settings area. Samsung have pretty much taken the everything and the kitchen sink approach here, and I really do mean that. Instead of hiding things behind menus, they have now just laid everything out and occasionally added a more option settings. It really is a almost overload here. I've complained about Samsung in the past hiding too many features under submenus. Now I think maybe they need to do a little bit of a tidy up. It's gone a little bit OTT. Although I do appreciate the quick settings option here, which does make it fast to move into those common use areas. By and large, there is nothing here that really should surprise anyone who's ever used a Samsung device before, or an Android device for that matter. All of the usual Samsung-y type things are here, like motions and gestures carried over from previous Samsung devices, and still not particularly useful. NFC and payments now finds itself with a headline option there within the settings, something where before it was buried away. Themes are a new thing for Samsung, and I'm not completely sure they're all that great an idea. At the end of the day, it's nice to have a different way to style your device, but the limited kind of options that are available here from the themes don't exactly inspire me, I have to say. It's the sort of thing where I'd probably rather end up going for a launcher like Go Launcher, where there's a lot wider choice really. Easy mode is how you can place your smartphone into a much easier to use interface, I think is the best way to put it. I would call this old person's mode or Luddite mode. Essentially, it strips away all of the complex features and just leaves the person with, well, the bare essentials. Great for your older Android user or for people who simply do not want to be overloaded with settings. As we move down through the device, we have our things like our language and input, battery, storage, and so on. But like I say, all of this is very much the muchness. If you've come across any Samsung or Android device before, many of these settings will be very familiar to you. Now, one of the interesting and standout features here, which is a kind of combination of software and hardware, is Wi-Fi and text use over your broadband line. Now, where I happen to be, I don't get the best signal in the world sometimes, especially don't get a particularly great 4G signal here. If you're listening, EE, please upgrade your microcell. But essentially, what EE have done here is allowed the Samsung Galaxy S6 to use a new feature. If it detects a weak cell signal, it will switch over and use whatever Wi-Fi connection happens to be available, routing the phone call and text messages directly over the broadband. Essentially no more dropped calls, no more weak signals so you can't even place calls, and so on. The slight issue I have with this particular feature is, for all intents and purposes, EE are piggybacking off your own hardware equipment and own broadband line that you pay money for, and are still going to charge you for your texts and your voice calls. Essentially, we're having to fill in the gaps in their own investment portfolio of having set up enough 4G towers and so on. It's a little bit dodgy in my opinion, and I would expect if I'm having to provide my own equipment to fill in these blank spaces in EE's provision, that they should be giving people a discount. Not so. But anyway, it's a feature that if you're on EE in the UK, and many other European networks will also be following suit over the next few months, this is a very useful feature. Essentially, if you don't have a strong cell signal and you are on Wi-Fi, you can still make your calls and get your texts. Not a bad idea, but it would be nice if the business proposition was just a little bit stronger. Now let's take a look at gaming on the Samsung Galaxy S6. We're going to show you a range of different games being played directly on the device so you can get an idea of the real-world performance that the Samsung Galaxy S6 offers. Certainly in our opinion, this device is a fine gaming machine. It has oodles of power to spare, and quite honestly, we couldn't find a game we could throw at it where we could see any perceivable slowdowns. But let's jump in and take a look at some games because I know you're dying to see them. This is Sky Gamblers Sky Raiders. The idea here is it's very much a World War II flight game. The full review for this particular game is up on our channel if you want to check it out. But beautiful and working very, very nicely on the Galaxy S6. There's absolutely no problems here with slowdown or slouching, although you won't be able to run this game at the very highest detail settings. In fact, no device I've come across so far can run this game at the highest detail settings. I think it's very much designed for those next generation Android TV consoles. You can see, beautifully smooth and nice and responsive. And that's obviously using the accelerometer controls there rather than on-screen controls. It works very, very nicely. This is Dungeon Hunter 5. Basically a Diablo style clone on mobile, and as you can see, it works very nicely indeed. No major grumbles I can come up with here, that's for sure. Graphically it's a very, very nice game, but also it really does push the kind of on-screen action quite a bit, and so a good test for any smartphone or device really. Plenty of particle physics and fire and so on, really does push the devices hard. You can see there, absolutely no slowdowns at all, nothing to be concerned with whatsoever. So this is Real Racing 3, an older title, about time EA actually got their act together and released Real Racing 4 if you ask me, but it's still a very good test game for checking how a device is going to run, because the fill rates tend to be quite aggressive going into corners, especially as you have a large number of cars also hitting those bends, and well, it can really trash the performance of most hardware. And so as you can see here, it's working quite beautifully. Normally we tend to see quite a bit of slowdown coming into corners, but here as you can see, it's holding a beautiful frame rate all the way through. It just looks fantastic. In all honesty, I find it very difficult to slow this Galaxy S6 down. In many cases I think we just don't have games which are powerful enough to really stress this hardware to its maximum. But as you can see, just beautiful really. Really, really solid graphics. So let's wrap it up, shall we? The Samsung Galaxy S6 is easily the highest performing device on the market today. The mixture of hardware and software is very good. Samsung have done a good job here at keeping the bloat under control whilst offering software features that the majority of users are actually going to find quite useful. The hardware is generally well made. There are some question marks hanging over some of the choices Samsung made in removing a few features, but by and large what they've added more than makes up for it. That camera is giddity, brilliant really. Compared to everything else on the market, especially things like the HTC One M9, it blows it out the water, and frankly I think it's just peaking a little tiny bit ahead of the iPhone 6 as well. The physical dimensions of the device, that gorgeous display and the way it feels in the hand are perfect. You really cannot get much better than this. That premium feel does wonders for Samsung's image in my opinion, and if they're able to carry this design metaphor through into things like the Note range, Samsung is going to have a very good year when it comes to producing gorgeous hardware that works beautifully in the hand. I may have a slight quibble about the price Samsung has dropped this device out for. Coming in at the $599 price point feels a little bit high for my liking, especially when we can consider many other devices are hitting the $550 mark instead. Is there enough here to justify that extra £50? Well, potentially there is. That Quad HD display is really, really gorgeous. The camera, again, beautiful. There's a lot here to consider bang for buck, but ultimately time will tell whether consumers are willing to shell out that extra money for what is perceivably not a huge uptick over some of the other manufacturers' feature offerings. If you're in the market for the best smartphone today, it is the Samsung Galaxy S6 by a country mile. But if any of the features that Samsung are offering here leave you cold, you may want to wait for other devices coming down later in the year. I hope you've really enjoyed watching our review of the Galaxy S6. Do please let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know your feedback, both about the device and about the review. At the end of the day, everything is subjective when it comes to smartphones, but in my opinion, I believe Samsung has delivered a knockout blow that sets them on a very solid footing for the rest of the year and into 2016.